All right, question number 1. McNulty Inc. produces desks and chairs. The CEO wants each product line to earn a profit margin of at least 20%, or else we're going to drop the product line. And then it says the margin is computed as profit over cost. So this is something to pay attention to. In this case, profit over cost, that equals our margin. Some questions, not in this homework, but in your other accounting classes, some questions will ask you to calculate profit margin. Sometimes the profit margin is based on sales. Sometimes it's profit over sales, and that's your profit margin percentage. In this case, it's profit over cost. So that's something, again, to pay attention to. You can calculate it different ways. And depending on whether they want profit over cost or profit over sales, obviously your profit margin percentage is going to be different. All right, so anyway, on this question, it's profit over cost. It says that manufacturing overhead is $800,000, and it's going to be allocated based on direct labor cost. And then part A1 wants to know the profit margin for both the chairs and the desks. All right, so I'm going to do the chairs, and then I guess you guys can do the desks on your own. So for chairs, we have to calculate the profit margin. We know that materials adds up to 584. Direct labor is 160. And then we have to allocate overhead. So overhead, as we said, is $800,000, but we're allocating it based on direct labor. So if you do your 800,000 overhead divided by direct labor. Now, direct labor is 160,000 for chairs and 340,000 for desks. So total direct labor is $500,000. Okay, so 800 for the year you incurred $800,000 in overhead and 500,000 in direct labor. And so if you're going to apply overhead based on direct labor, you just do 800 divided by 500, and that's going to give you 160% or 1.6. Same thing. Okay. So that means that for every dollar of direct labor that you incur, you're gonna incur $1.60 of overhead. All right. So in the case of chairs, you have direct labor of 160K, and then if you multiply that by 1.6, you get 256,000 in overhead. All right. So to calculate our profit margin, we're going to add this 256K. So our total expenses for chairs is 584 plus 160 plus 256, and that gives us, let's see, 584 plus 160 plus 256. That gives us 1,000. So they're being nice to us. They gave us a nice round number, 1,000. And then so if your cost is let's see, All right. So if your cost is 1,000 and your sales is 150, that means your profit margin, well, your profit, dollar-wise, you made 150,000 profit on these chairs. All right, and then so if you have 150 profit, and you divide that by your cost, because remember you can calculate margin two different ways, and they give you two different answers, so you have to be careful. But in this case, they're telling us to use cost, and the cost was 1,000, and then so that gives you a profit margin of 15%. All right. So answer to A1 for chairs is 15%. Now you're going to do the same thing for desks. You're going to have to add the materials and labor, and then find out what you allocate for overhead, and then figure out what your dollar amount of profit is, and then do the same math here, where you take profit divided by cost. All right, so you're going to calculate that. You're going to get an answer, and your answer for chairs, for desks, sorry, is going to be 25%. I'm not going to do the math for you, but I want you to be able to do it, of course, because it'll be on your test. And then so for A2, it says which of the two products should be dropped. Well, for chairs it's 15%, and for desks it's 25%. The CFO wants to drop anything under 20%, so they're going to have to drop the chairs. All right, so that's your answer to A2. Now for A3, it says, or A2B, it says, regardless of your answer in A, the CFO decides at the beginning of year 2 to drop chairs. Says that the company analyst estimates that overhead without the chairs will be $650,000. So again, this goes back to what we talked about in the prior lecture, where just because you drop a product doesn't mean that that the cost is going to drop proportionally as well. So in this case, we're dropping chairs, and our total overhead was let's see, it was $800,000. We dropped one product line, but it didn't drop by about half. It dropped only at just $650,000. So now it wants us to calculate our margin for the desks if we drop the chair line. So we're going to do similar math to what we did in Part A. If we kept the desks, it says that our direct materials is let's see, is 800,000. Our direct labor is still going to be 340,000. And our overhead, now this makes it a little bit easier for us for overhead. For the first, for Part A, we had two different lines, two different product lines, and we had to allocate overhead to the two different lines, and we allocated it based on direct labor. In this case, we only have one product line, so if we have overhead of 650, all 650 is going to go to desks. So that gives us a total of 107.90 million. All right. Part B says that we're expecting our revenue to be the same. So our revenue is still going to be 2,105,000. So the difference between the cost and the revenue is going to be $315,000. All right, so we have $315,000 in profit. If you divide that by your cost, and again that cost is 1,790,000. If you do 315 divided by 1790, you're going to get 17.6%. So our profit margin is different. Remember, in the first, in Part A, the profit margin for desks was 25%. We drop a product line, and now our profit margin for desks is 17.6%. So again, the CFO kind of didn't get what he wanted. He wants all of his it seems like he wanted all of his product lines to make over 20%. And when he had the two product lines, the chairs and the desks were over 20%. But maybe he didn't realize that shutting down the chairs, he still has fixed costs, and so now that the chair line is gone, those fixed costs are going to go to the desks, and then when you do the math there, the desks profit margin fell under 20% as well. So something to think about. Product lines affect each other. Just be aware of that, because like I said, the CEO can't just drop a product line and expect the rest of the company to maintain exactly what it was doing, with no numbers being changed and no expenses being reallocated. All right, question number 2. Main Street Ice Cream Company allocates ice cream on a plant-wide allocation method. So again, going back to the chapter, sometimes you do a plant-wide allocation, meaning you just have one rate for the entire plant, and sometimes you'll allocate on a smaller scale. You can allocate per flavor, per department, whatever it is. And those tend to be a little bit more of an accurate allocation. But in this case, for Part A, we are doing a plant-wide allocation. It says to allocate overhead, we are basing it on direct labor hours, and our rate is $3 overhead per one direct labor hour. One department produces strawberry and vanilla, and the other department produces chocolate. And then it gives us information about the costs for direct labor for each flavor and the cost of raw materials per flavor. Looks like chocolate takes the most direct labor. Wonder if that's true in real life. I don't know. Raw materials, looks like strawberry is the most expensive raw material. And produce is expensive, so I think that's probably realistic. And then Part A says that if the number of hours of labor per 1,000 gallons is 50 for strawberry, 55 for vanilla, and 75 for chocolate, I'm going to have to compute the total cost of 1,000 gallons. So I'm going to do the strawberry for you guys, and then you guys can do the vanilla and chocolate. So for strawberry, the fact patterns tell us that direct labor per 1,000 gallons is $750. The raw materials is $800. And then we're going to have to figure out how much overhead to put. So for overhead, we're allocating $3 per labor hour. it tells us that we have 50 hours of direct labor, and we're going to allocate $3 per hour. So 3 times 50 is 150. So we add up these three, 750 plus 800 plus 150, and we get our answer, $1,700 for strawberry. Alright, so now you're going to do the same for vanilla and chocolate. The direct labor and direct materials numbers are given to you. You just have to do some quick math, multiply the number of hours for vanilla times $3, and then multiply the number of hours for chocolate times $3, and then add up the costs. For part B, Charlene, which is the manager of the chocolate department, Department C, made a complaint. She said that in the chocolate department they use older machines, and she said that's not fair to allocate costs to both departments on the same using the same method, because the chocolate department uses older machines. The SV department for strawberry and vanilla uses newer machines. So there are different costs there. So Charlene said that they shouldn't be using a plant-wide allocation method. She thinks that they should be allocated in a different way. So for part B, they give us Department SV, and they give us Department C, and then they give us they give us the overhead amounts for each department. So for overhead, for SV is 105,840, and for C is 23,760. All right, and then they decide that for Department SV, the allocation rate should be based on machine hours. Machine hours for SV is 25,200, and then for Department C, they decide to use labor hours, and labor hours was 18,000. So now the question wants us to calculate the allocation rate for each department using their separate methods. So for SV, we're going to do the 105,840 divided by 25,200. And we're going to get $4.20. So that means that for every machine hour that that Department SV uses, they're going to allocate $4.20 of overhead to that department. Now for Department C, we're going to do the same math, but instead of dividing by machine hours, we're going to divide by labor hours. So when we do 23,760 divided by 18,000, we get $1.32. All right, so it's pretty simple math. You just have to read the question and see exactly what they're looking for. And then finally for C, it says compute the cost of 1,000 gallons of each flavor of ice cream using each department's own allocation rate. So the remember Department SV makes a strawberry and vanilla. and Department SV is using machine hours, and then chocolate is using direct labor hours. So it says here that the strawberry requires 50 machine hours. We're going to multiply that by the 420 rate that we calculated, and we get 1,760. For vanilla, the fact pattern says it takes 55 machine hours. Times 420. That gives us 1,556. And then chocolate, we're going to allocate it based on direct labor hours. And so it says that the labor hours, we have to look at requirement A. So we'll look at part A of the question. Part A of the question shows that chocolate has 150 direct labor hours, and we're going to multiply that by the $1.32 rate that we calculated in part B, and we're going to get 1824. All right, so that's the answers to part C. All right, question 3. We're looking at a manufacturer of fishing equipment. This company makes two different fishing reels, M008 and M123. Looks like the M123 is the better reel, so probably will be more expensive. Right now they are allocating overhead based on direct labor costs. So this is a little bit different from the prior question. We originally did allocation based on direct labor hours, I believe, and this one is direct labor cost. So instead of doing by hours, we're going to do by dollar amounts. Manufacturing overhead is $280,000, and then the question gives us costs for direct labor and direct materials for each reel. And then management did a little bit of a deeper analysis, and they think that overhead costs are caused by 3 different cost drivers. So instead of just doing a blanket allocation based on direct labor cost, they broke down the $280,000 of overhead into machine hours, production runs, and inspections. And then they give us the activity level. They say how many machine hours were used in the month, how many production runs were made, and how many inspections were made as well. So it asks us to allocate in part A, allocate overhead to each product using these cost drivers instead of the overall direct labor cost rate. So again, I'll do one of the reels, and then you guys can do the other one. I'm going to do the M008. And so it wants us to calculate what the total overhead is going to be allocated to M008. And then after that, we have to figure out our total unit cost. So for the M008, for machine hours, we look at the fact pattern, and it says that the costs are $120,000 total, okay, for machine hours. We're going to have to split that between M008 and M123, but again, I'm just going to do M008. So the total cost again is $120,000. According to the chart, there's 8,000 machine hours that ran that month, but only 5,000 of those hours were for M008. So the way you do it is 5,000 divided by your total, which is 8,000. And the answer you get is 75,000. Okay, you see how I did that again? The question tells you the total costs for machine hours, and then it gives you the activity level. So you find out, you do the math to see what activity level pertains to each reel. You find that percentage or that ratio, and then you multiply by the total cost, and you get 75,000. Now for production runs, and this program does not detect handwriting that well, so I apologize for the sloppy handwriting. My handwriting is not the best, but it is way better than what shows up here. For production runs, the total cost was 70,000, and it looks like there were 20 production runs in total. 10 production runs were made for M008, and the other 10 were made for the other reel. So you do the math there, 70,000 times 10 over 20, and you get $35,000. For production runs. And then finally for inspections, the total cost for inspections was 90,000, and this was the total cost for both product lines. Now there were 20 inspections that related to our product line out of the 60 total inspections. So 20 over 60, that's a 1/3. So 90,000 times 1/3 would be $30,000. So you add up these three amounts, 75,000, 35,000, and 30,000, and you get 140. So your answer to M008 total overhead is 140,000. All right, now the second part of Part A wants to know the total unit costs. So so we know that M008 gets 140,000 of overhead, but when we're doing total unit cost, we first have to calculate the total cost, and the total cost includes more than overhead. It also includes direct materials and direct labor. And for direct materials for M008 was $100,000, and that was given to us. Direct labor was $100,000. So you add those up, and you get $340,000. All right, and then you divide that by the number of units, and it says in the paragraph, in the second paragraph, it says that there were 12,000 units of M008. So 340 divided by 12, and you get $28.33. Right, so that's the answer to Part A. All right, so you guys calculate the amounts for M123 on your own. Now for Part B, it says, well, how much overhead would be assigned if we had done the direct labor cost as was the original method of allocation. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is find out what our what that rate would be. So our rate, we know that our total we know that our total overhead expense is $280,000, and we know that we originally allocated based on direct labor cost. So we look at that first chart on question 3, and it shows that total direct labor cost was $140,000. And so looks like our rate is 200%. So that means that for every dollar of direct labor cost we incur, we're going to apply $2 of overhead cost. So now we have to figure out how much we're going to allocate to M008. The facts show us that we had 100,000 of direct labor cost, and so if we multiply that by 200%, we're going to get 200,000 of overhead. And again, the way we do that is we do 200% times direct labor cost. And then the question also wants us to calculate total unit cost. So from here, we're going to just add our direct materials, which is 100,000. So our total cost is 400,000. And we divide that by the number of units, which is 12,000 units. And we get $33.33. All right. So again, for Part B, for M008, total overhead is $200,000, and again, that's 200% of our direct labor cost, and the total unit cost is going to be $33.33. All right, so you can see that there's a huge difference between depending on what allocation method you use. If you're allocating by cost driver, remember our total overhead was for M008 was 140, and then our total overhead using the direct labor cost method is 200,000 for that product line. So it's a pretty big difference, 140,000 versus 200,000. And then it changes our total unit cost quite a bit too, from $28.33 to $33. So again, it's important to try to pick an allocation method that's the most accurate based on your based on the company that you're working for. At the end, it all washes out. I mean, at the end, you still incurred $280,000 of overhead, but depending on how you allocate it, it might cause you to shut down a product line or continue a product line when you probably should have made the opposite decision. All right, question number 4. John's Computer Shop makes both business and personal computers. Says that they have an accounts receivable department, and accounts receivable performs 2 different activities. They do billing and dispute resolution. But the way that the company allocates the costs related to the accounts receivable department, they just allocate it based on the number of bills prepared. So if there's a personal computer that's sold, that the bill gets a certain allocation. to the personal line, and then if a business computer is sold, the related bill will get a portion of the cost. So Kyle, the manager of the business division, is worried, and he says that that's not a fair way to do it. And I think he's right, because he says that there's different costs. You know, there's the bills that are prepared, and then there's dispute resolution. And he says that the business division is getting too much cost allocated to it. So the personal division prepared 600 bills, but there were 60 disputes. So 60 over 600 for personal, 60 over 600. That's a 10% rate, 10% dispute rate. All right, so for every 10 bills that this department sends out, one of them is in dispute. But if you look at the business, they only had 12 disputes. Now they did have fewer bills, but not that significantly fewer. So out of 12 out of 400, that's going to be a rate of 3%. So very few of the business department's bills get disputed, but the personal ones, there's a lot of disputes. And if you look at the breakdown of the costs between billing and dispute resolution is quite a big chunk of money. So to allocate a lot of that chunk to the business department when they're not incurring a lot of disputes, then it's really not that fair. So anyway, for part A, so what I just showed you here is not part of the question, but it's good to know, to be able to understand what's going on. Now for part A, it says under the current allocation system, how are the costs going to be allocated? Well, under the current allocation system, the personal department, personal line of business, is going to get allocated 60%. So there's 600 bills that were issued or prepared by the personal department out of a total of 1,000. So 600 over 1,000, that's 60%. We multiply that by the total amount of costs incurred by the accounts receivable department, and we get 50,400. So that's how much was allocated to personal. Business, you're going to do the same type of calculation, multiply by 400 over 1,000, and you're going to get 33,600. Right? I'll let you guys do that math on your own. Now for 4B, it says, well, what if we do allocation based on these different activities, based on billing and dispute resolution? I think that would be more fair. So for 4B, I'm going to do the amounts for personal. So for billing, the total was 48,000, but out of 1,000 bills, we this department incurred 1,000 total bills were prepared, but 600 belonged to personal. So when you do $48,000 times 60%, you're going to get 28,800. All right, and then for disputes, there was $36,000 in cost incurred by dispute resolution, and personal the personal line took up the vast majority of it because there were 60 disputes and there were 70 total. So again, the vast majority of disputes come to the personal department. So 36,000 times 6 over 72, and you get 30,000. So that's a little bit more fair, I think. Instead of dividing, instead of splitting up the costs evenly between both departments based on bills, you should allocate the costs of the disputes to the department that is actually having all of these disputes. All right, so that was the personal part for Part B, and then you guys do the business numbers on your own. All right, question 5. KDS distributes food. There's 2 divisions here, the purchasing and the distribution divisions. But in this question, we're just going to focus on the distribution division. It says that the distribution division has 3 different activities. They take orders, they pick orders, and they package orders. The distribution division also has 15 employees, and all 15 employees can do all of those 3 tasks. Each employee works 40 hours a week. They work 50 weeks out of the year, and then, but out of those 40 hours that they work, 15% of those hours of that time is for training and administrative tasks. And then it says the total cost of distribution are $826, $200. The fact pattern continues, says that distribution received 25,000 orders. There were 30,000 orders that had to be picked, and 27,700 that were packaged. So it wants to know the cost per minute for activities in distribution. So this is just a long multiplication problem that we have to do. Cost per minute. Well, we know that the total cost of distribution is 826,200. But we have to get a per minute rate. So how do we do that? Well, we have 15 employees, and they work 50 weeks. The question says that they work 50 weeks. Now, keep in mind that there are 52 weeks in a year. In this case, they're only working 50 weeks, so they're getting a 2-week vacation. But that'll be important to know in the next question. But anyway, so these 15 employees, they're working 50 weeks. And then in a week, there's 40 hours worked. But remember what I said, that the whole 40 hours is not actually worked. 15% of that time is for training and other administrative tasks. So they're actually only working 85%. All right. So if 100% of their time they're working, then you would just multiply by 100. But in this case, 15% is going to admin time. Only 85% is actually going to be in their distribution tasks. All right, so you multiply by 85%, and then you multiply by 60 minutes. All right, so again, you take your 15 employees times 50 weeks times 40 hours a week times 85% times 60 minutes, and that will give you 1,530,000 minutes. All right, so we have those minutes, so we just do our 826,000 total costs divided by 1,530,000 minutes, and that is going to give us 54 cents per minute. All right, so that's your answer to part A. For part B, it says, what is the cost of an order that requires all three activities? Well, taking orders takes 10 minutes. Picking an order takes 14 minutes. And packaging an order takes 20 minutes. So if an order takes all of these tasks, that's going to be 44 minutes total that's going to be that's needed to process the entire order. We multiply that by our 54-cent rate that we calculated, and we get 23.76. Then part C wants to know how many minutes of unused capacity did distribution have for the year. So this one is, again, just simple math, several steps, but fairly simple math. So for taking orders, that takes 10 minutes, right? And then the question tells us, the fact pattern tells us there were 25,000 orders. So 10 times 25,000, that's going to be 250,000 minutes, right, for taking. For picking, takes 14 minutes. And there were 30,000 orders that needed to be picked. So 14 times 30,000, that's 420,000 minutes. And then for packing, there were 20 minutes. And there were 27,700 orders that needed to be packed. So that gives us 554,000 minutes. So if you add up all these three numbers, 250 plus 420 plus 554, you get 1,224,000 minutes that were used. But the department had a total of 1,530,000 minutes, if you recall from the previous part of the question. So if you had 1,530,000 minutes that you could use, but you only used 1,224,000, that means that we had 306,000 unused minutes. All right, so that's going to be your answer to part C, 306,000. In Part D, it says what is the cost of the unused capacity. So for this, all we do is we take our unused minutes, which was 306,000 unused minutes. We know that the cost per minute was 54 cents. And that's the same cost whether you use the minutes or you don't. That's going to give you 165,240. So that's your answer to Part 5D. All right, question 6. Very similar to question 5, but some small differences. It says that the manager of the personnel department at City Enterprises wants to do activity-based costing. There are 4 activities that her employees do: hiring, interviewing, assessment, and separation. She has 5 employees, and it tells how many minutes each of these activities takes. The 5 employees, they work 35-hour weeks, and they have 4 weeks of vacation. So remember what I said in the last question. Pay attention to that. There are 52 weeks in a year, but 4 of those weeks, these people get to go on vacation. Out of the 35 hours that they work, 5 hours are reserved for admin tasks. So actually, there's only 30 hours of work that they do in their for the job that they were hired for. Total costs are for the staff are $972,000, and then it gives us how many interviews, hires, assessments, and separations the department had to process. So for Part A, it wants to know what the cost per minute is. So we're going to do the same type of calculation that we did in the prior question. We're going to do, I'm going to, just to make it clear, I'm going to break down the calculation a little bit more than I did in the prior one. It's going to look like what you did in chemistry class. All right. So you have 5 employees. And each employee gets works 48 weeks. So 48 weeks per employee. All right, and then they're not working 35 hours. Well, they're being paid for 35 hours, but they only do 30 hours in their hired task. So we're going to multiply by 30 hours per week. And then we know that there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. So then we do the math. So I said that this looks like chemistry because this is how I was taught to set things up in chemistry. You set them up in these ratios, and then you can cross them out at the end. So there's an employee at the top, there's an employee at the bottom, so that's fine. Weeks cancel out top to bottom, hours and hours. Minutes don't cancel out. There's nothing to cancel the minutes out for, so we know that our answer is going to be in minutes. And so we do the math of 5 times 48 times 30 times 60, and that gives us 432,000 minutes. All right, so that's part of Part A. That's something that we had to calculate. Now we're going to do $972,000, which was the cost, divided by 432,000 minutes. And that gives us $2.25 per minute. That's Part A, $2.25. Now for part B, the question is, what is the cost of interviewing and hiring one employee? Well, interviewing takes 45 minutes, and hiring takes 60 minutes. So to interview and hire an employee, that takes 105 minutes. We know from our prior problem that it's $2.25 per minute. So 105 times $2.25, we get $2.36.25 for part B. Part C and D, I'm going to let you guys do that on your own, since that's exactly like question 5. We already calculated the total minutes for the department, and then now you just have to figure out how many did they actually use. So, you know, the question tells you how many interviews you did, multiply that by the number of minutes per interview. Do the same thing for hiring, assessment, and separation. And you should be able to do this problem pretty easily. And then part D is the cost of the unused capacity. So once you have your unused minutes that you're going to calculate in part C, just multiply that by your $2.25 to get the answer to part D. All right, question 7. The beginning fact patterns are the same as question 6, so so it's going to look really familiar to you. They changed up a little bit at the bottom. They added information about interviews for different people, for managers as well as executives. For managers, the interviewing time is going to be an additional 120 minutes. And for executives, it'll be 360 minutes. Another issue is that they talk about involuntary separations, and those take an additional 180 minutes. So for question A, it says, what is the total time required for the interviewing activity? Now, they actually didn't word this question well. What they really meant to say was, what is the total time required for that interviewing activity for an executive? All right. So I've told them to fix the question, and hopefully they do in a future edition. But anyway, for an executive, you're going to have your 45-minute regular interview. But then, according to the new facts and the fact pattern, it says that you're going to have an additional 120 minutes at the manager level, and then an additional 360 minutes at the executive level. And at in parentheses right after it says 360 minutes, it says in addition to the time required for a manager. So that means that we have to add regular time plus manager time plus executive time. 45 plus 120 plus 360, that's 525 minutes. It takes quite a bit of time to interview for an executive. Now for part B, it says what is the total time required for the separation processing activity. Again, it's not worded well. What they mean to say is for an involuntary separation. So that would be your 90 minutes plus your extra 180 for involuntary separation. So that gives you 270 minutes. Part C and D you can do on your own. It wants to know the cost of interviewing a manager and an executive, and then the cost of a voluntary versus involuntary separation. Well, we already calculated the minutes that we need to know, so now we just need to know the rate. And the rate is actually the same as in question 6. It was $2.25 per minute. They didn't change those facts on us, so we don't have to redo those calculations. So just do the math, multiply by the appropriate number of minutes times $2.25 for part C and D, and you should be able to calculate that fairly quickly. All right, now that's the end of the homework. If you have any questions, as usual, feel free to email me, and then I will see you for Chapter 10.